Welcome to Whisperglass, where every story is a reflection, a memory, a moment, a question that was never meant to be answered. If you love quiet, strange, beautifully broken worlds, you're in the right place. Today, we begin with whispers of the soul, a story of grief, ritual, and the quiet haunt of a fractured past. Meet Elara, a woman with eyes like silent storms and a soul stitched with old wounds. She walks alone through a city that forgot her name, until one night a mysterious letter offers a path. To truth, to darkness, or perhaps to something far more dangerous. Please like, subscribe, tap the notification bell, and share this journey with someone who still listens to the echoes. You're not just watching a story, you're stepping through the glass. Welcome to Whisperglass. In the sprawling city where buildings clawed at the clouds like bone fingers, there lived a woman named Elara. She moved through the world with a detached elegance, her steps light as if she feared disturbing the dust that clung to forgotten alleyways. Her eyes, a piercing gray, were the kind that spoke in silence, reflecting stories left untold. To those who noticed her, she was a presence both haunting and magnetic, a porcelain mask cracked just beneath the surface. Elara's soul was an intricate tapestry of old wounds, each stitch a memory of loss, betrayal, and whispered promises never kept. Once she had been vibrant, a woman of laughter and sharp wit, the kind who turned heads in every room. But life, with its inexorable cruelty, had carved at her heart with patient precision. Friends had become shadows, lovers had turned into specters, and family ties had frayed into loose threads lost to the wind. She lived alone in a weathered apartment overlooking the rain-slicked streets. The window, always slightly open, invited the chill of the night air, a silent companion to her solitude. On the walls hung paintings she had done long ago, portraits of faceless figures, each smeared in deep reds and ashen grays, like souls trapped in a storm. Elara's injury was not one of flesh or bone. It was something deeper, a quiet rupture that bled unseen. She often found herself staring into the cracked mirror above her fireplace, tracing the fading scars on her wrist where pain had once found an outlet. But it was not the physical wounds that haunted her. It was the emptiness that followed, the profound numbness that whispered in the quiet hours of the night. One evening, as rain hissed against the windowpane, she lit a cigarette with trembling hands. The ember flared, illuminating her features in flickering orange. Her lips, painted a muted crimson, parted slightly, releasing a curl of smoke that danced upwards like a spectre's caress. She watched it rise, imagining it as the ghost of her past self, slipping into the shadows that clung to the ceiling. In her solitude, Elara found solace in creating rituals, silent ceremonies of remembrance. Each night, she would light a single candle and place it by the window. The flame would waver against the glass, a small defiance against the encroaching darkness. She told herself it was for the people she had lost, for the parts of herself that had faded away. But deep down, she knew it was for the echoing hollowness inside her, a feeble gesture to keep the void at bay. One night, as thunder rolled across the city and the storm lashed against the buildings, a knock came at her door. Startled, she hesitated, her fingers hovering over the handle. Visitors were rare, almost unheard of. When she finally opened the door, there stood a man cloaked in rain, his face obscured by the brim of a worn hat. He said nothing, but in his hand he held an envelope sealed with wax. Without a word, he placed it in her palm and turned away, vanishing into the storm as if he had never been there. Elara closed the door and examined the envelope. The seal was unfamiliar, a symbol of a crescent moon entwined with thorns. Her heart tightened as she broke it open, unfolding the letter. Within, to the woman with the soul like broken glass, it read, "Your pain has echoed in the world beyond. there are those who listen. If you wish to know the truth of your sorrow, if you dare, you need only follow the path to where shadows gather. Midnight awaits. The letter was unsigned. Elara stood there, her breath shallow. The rain's rhythm against the window grew louder, as if urging her onward. She felt a pull, not hope, but a deep, gnawing curiosity. For the first time in years, her pulse quickened, though her hands trembled. The void within her whispered that perhaps answers lay in the darkness, that her fractured soul could find understanding, or further ruin, beyond the veil. Without another thought, she extinguished the candle, donned her coat, and stepped into the night. The rain greeted her like an old adversary, cold and unrelenting, soaking her to the bone. But she felt it as if through a haze, each droplet a muted echo against her skin. The city swallowed her figure as she walked, her shadow merging with the ones cast by flickering street lamps. She followed no map, only the tug of something unseen, something ancient. Midnight was close, and Elara, with her injured soul, would meet it head-on. In the distance a door loomed where no door should be, black, waiting, pulsing faintly as if in tune with her heartbeat. Elara approached the door, its surface rippling faintly as if it were a pool of ink suspended in mid-air. Her breath caught in her throat, the air around her thickening with a scent like old parchment and forgotten roses. She hesitated for the briefest moment, her fingers hovering just above the cold, smooth surface. The weight of her choice pressed down on her, heavier than the storm that battered the city behind her. Then, with a resolve born of weariness rather than courage, she pressed her palm to the door. The world shifted. The air folded inward, sucking sound and sensation into a tight spiral that yanked her forward. For a moment she was weightless, falling through a darkness so complete it swallowed every thought, every lingering fear. When she landed, it was soundless, an impact not of body, but of presence. She found herself standing in a vast hall that stretched into forever, its walls lined with tall, arched mirrors that reflected not her image, but shadows of herself. Each mirror shimmered with muted light, showing versions of her that twisted and blurred, one weeping blood, another laughing with cracked lips, others dancing, screaming, whispering secrets only she could hear. A figure awaited her at the far end of the hall, seated upon a throne, wrought of blackened bone and adorned with thorns of silver. The figure was cloaked in shifting darkness, neither man nor woman, its face hidden beneath a veil of moth-wing patterns that shimmered with every breath it took. "You've come," the figure said, voice layered with echoes that filled the air like distant chimes. The woman with the soul like broken glass. Elara's throat tightened. Who are you?" The figure leaned forward, the shadows of its form folding like wings. "I am the keeper of fractures, the one who tends the wounds of souls. You have carried your pain long enough, and it has echoed here, into this place where shadows gather and stories end." "Why?" she whispered. Her voice trembled, but not with fear. It was exhaustion, the weight of her own emptiness. "Why? Me?" The keeper's voice softened, almost a caress. "Because your soul is not merely broken, it is hungry, it aches for what was lost, but it also yearns to become something more. You have lived in silence, binding your pain in rituals and smoke, but beneath it all there is a desire to be whole again, or perhaps to be something other." The mirrors shimmered, the images within becoming clearer. They no longer showed shadows, but moments from Elara's life. Her laughter in a sunlit room before the betrayals, the quiet agony of solitude, the pale reflection of herself sitting by the window as the world passed by. Each fragment was a shard of her, a sliver of memory twisted by pain. The keeper extended a hand, palm facing upward. "If you choose, I can make you whole. But know this, Wholeness is not kindness, it is not mercy, it is truth, and truth has its price. Elara's eyes flicked to the mirrors, her reflection splintered 1,000 ways. She felt the stirrings of something within her, not fear, but a cold curiosity. What was she, beyond her injuries? Was she the girl who had once dreamed of love? The woman who painted faceless figures in blood and grey? Or was she something else entirely, something born from the shards of all those selves? Her lips parted, and though her voice was barely audible, it was steady. What is the price? The keeper's veil shimmered, as if in silent laughter. The self you cling to will be gone. You will be reborn from your injuries, but the woman you are now will cease to exist. You will become the sum of your choices, your shadows, your betrayals. You will be whole, but not the same. Elara's breath came shallow, but her pulse thrummed with a strange exhilaration. To shed the weight of this injured soul, to become something beyond pain, beyond memory. And then, softly, she nodded. I accept. The keeper rose from the throne, and the mirrors around them trembled violently, the images within shattering into 1,000 slivers that rained down like falling stars. The shadows writhed, encircling Elara, seeping into her skin, her bones, her very essence. It was not pain. It was a consuming, a devouring that filled the emptiness she had carried. For so long, her body convulsed, but she did not cry out. Instead, she laughed, a low, broken sound that echoed through the endless hall. When the shadows receded, Elara stood transformed. Her skin gleamed with a sheen like polished obsidian, her eyes molten silver, her hair flowing in ripples of shadow. The emptiness within her was gone, replaced by something vast, something dark, something complete. The keeper inclined its head. Welcome, Elara. You are now as you were meant to be. She stepped forward, her laugh soft but resonant, a sound that trembled with newfound power. The injured soul was gone. What remained was something darker, something whole, and the city beyond the door would soon learn her name. The door behind Elara, now a thin, glimmering scar in the fabric of reality, shimmered and vanished with a whisper. She stood at the mouth of the alleyway, rain pouring around her in thick sheets, but the water no longer touched her. Where droplets should have clung to her skin, they sizzled and vanished, repelled by the shadow that coiled beneath her surface. The storm seemed to draw back from her presence, the wind hesitating, the night itself holding its breath. Elara lifted her gaze to the city skyline, its lights winking like fragile stars through the haze. She could feel them all. The people, in their apartments, their pulses like flickers of weak candlelight. Their fears, their desires, their griefs, they pulsed through her senses, each soul a fragile bead trembling in a vast web. She inhaled deeply, tasting their raw emotions as if savoring the first drop of rich wine. A smirk curved her lips, now darker than blood. This wholeness was not peace, it was clarity, sharp as a blade honed on bone. As she stepped forward, the shadows at her feet lengthened, twisting into shapes that crawled after her like loyal hounds. Each footfall on the slick pavement was soundless, yet each left behind a faint smear of darkness that the rain could not wash away. She wandered through the city, the familiar streets now foreign, her presence unseen yet felt. Lights flickered in windows as she passed. Whispers crawled behind closed doors, though none could see the figure moving like smoke between them. She paused outside a bar she used to frequent. A place where she had once been vibrant, surrounded by laughter and clinking glasses. She could see them through the steamed windows, the laughter brittle, the faces unfamiliar now. Inside, a man at the bar glanced toward the window, his gaze sharpening with a flicker of unease. He couldn't see her. Not quite. But he felt the weight of her stare, the whisper of something forgotten brushing the back of his mind. He shivered and turned away, but the shadow of her presence lingered. Elara's smile deepened, a silent acknowledgement of her new dominion over the fragile hearts of those who once turned away from her pain. Her steps drew her further into the city's underbelly, toward the neon-lit district where smoke and desperation mingled. She passed by a man slumped against a wall, his eyes glazed with opiates and rain. His soul was faint, flickering like a dying ember. She knelt, her fingers tracing the air just above his skin. His breath hitched, a faint whimper escaping his cracked lips. "Sleep?" she whispered, her voice sliding into his bones like a lullaby spun from shadows. His chest stilled, his final breath slipping away like a sigh into the night. His soul, a fragile wisp of pale light, hovered for a moment before Elara inhaled sharply. The wisp vanished into her mouth and her form shimmered with faint luminescence. His death was not cruel. It was quiet, almost tender, a mercy laced with a predatory grace. With each soul she touched, each life she brushed against, she grew stronger. Her injured soul had been a vessel. Now she was the devourer of what others discarded, their despair, their sorrow, their weakness. By the time dawn bled pale light over the city's skyline, Elara stood at its highest point, the rooftop of an abandoned building where pigeons had long since fled. She spread her arms, the shadows coiling around her in sinuous tendrils. The first light of morning struck her, but it did not burn. Instead, it painted her in shifting silver and onyx, her eyes gleaming with a terrible, luminous hunger. She whispered into the wind, her voice no longer hers alone, but a chorus of all the souls she had consumed. "Remember me." And the city, though it did not yet know her name, trembled in the depths of its collective consciousness. Elara was no longer a woman with an injured soul. She was a harbinger, a specter wrapped in the remnants of her pain, now wielded as a weapon, and she had only just begun. From her perch atop the abandoned rooftop, Elara surveyed the city as if it were a living thing, fragile, unaware of the weight pressing down upon it. The wind tugged at her hair, the whispers of the souls she had absorbed murmuring like silken threads in her ears. She could feel the pulse of the city beneath her feet, the grinding heartbeat of humanity, the shallow gasps of its desires, fears, and failures. It was a song she now conducted, a rhythm she could bend to her own design. With a slow, deliberate gesture, she extended one hand toward the horizon. The shadows coiling at her feet stirred, stretching outward like black vines. They slithered down the side of the building across cracked asphalt, creeping through alleyways and fissures in the concrete. As they moved, they left behind no trace. Just a subtle, suffocating weight that settled into the bones of the city. The first to feel it were the restless, the addicts huddled in corners, the drunks swaying on street corners, the dreamers who wandered too close to the edges of despair. They felt the air thicken around them, a cloying presence that whispered of surrender. Many succumbed, their minds folding in on themselves, their wills crumbling. Their souls, faint as moths drawn to flame, drifted upward and vanished into Elara's grasp, leaving behind empty husks that the city quickly overlooked. But Elara's hunger was not random. She was methodical, weaving her influence like a spider crafting an intricate web. She targeted those whose grief echoed her own, those who clung to their misery as if it were a shield. She found them, office workers numbed by routine, wives with hollow smiles, fathers with secret guilt. And she whispered to them through the air itself, promising release, promising understanding. They came to her, not knowing why. They stumbled through rain-slick streets, through doors that should not exist, into spaces between spaces where Elara waited with a smile as soft as moonlight and as sharp as a blade. "You're tired," she would murmur, her voice a balm over their raw nerves. "You've carried this weight too long, let it go." And when they did, when their souls flickered free of their bodies, Elara devoured them, each one a brush stroke of color added to her growing tapestry of power. Within weeks, the city's undercurrent shifted. Whispers crept through its streets, of shadows seen at the corners of eyes, of dreams turning to ash, of hearts weighed down by invisible burdens. Those who once thrived on ambition and greed found their wills eroded, businesses closed, lovers fell into silence. Friends stopped calling, their laughter lost in the thickening fog. The authorities, those fragile pillars of order, began to notice, though they could not explain it. Reports of inexplicable disappearances, sudden catatonia, and strange deaths filled their desks. But no pattern emerged, only a quiet dread that settled into their bones. Elara watched it all from the shadows, her form slipping through the city unseen except by those already claimed. She was becoming something vast, something woven into the fabric of the world itself. The city no longer repelled her. It bent to her presence, its heartbeat syncing with her own. And then, when the city was ready, she made herself known. One night. As midnight's bell echoed across the rooftops, she stepped into the heart of the city square where once festivals and celebrations had drawn crowds. Now it stood empty, the buildings surrounding it darkened as if in mourning. Elara's form shimmered into visibility, not fully corporeal, but enough that those watching from their windows felt their breaths catch. Her eyes blazed silver, her skin a tapestry of shadows and whispers. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of wilted flowers and rain. "I am Elara," she said, her voice a ripple through stone and glass. "I am the truth of your sorrow, the echo of your silence. You fed me with your grief, and now I stand among you, whole." The city trembled, though no one moved. The streets held their breath. "You thought to bury your broken selves in rituals and forgetting," she continued, her tone smooth, her smile faint and sharp. "But I am the gathering of those fragments. I am what remains when the soul is devoured by its own reflection. I am the fracture and the wholeness beyond." As she spoke, the shadows around her twisted into grotesque shapes, faceless forms that mimicked those she had consumed. They writhed and danced, weaving a tapestry of despair and transformation. Then, as if cued by her silent command, the city's lights flickered and died. Darkness reigned, broken only by the silver glow of Elara's form. In the silence that followed, she whispered, a sound that carried through the alleys and high-rises. "This city belongs to me now." As Elara's voice echoed into the silence, the city seemed to exhale a long, shuddering breath. The darkness did not lift. Instead, it thickened, coalescing into an oppressive mantle that pressed against windows and doors. Streetlights remained. Extinguished, the mechanical hum of the city's machinery stilled, as though the very veins of the metropolis acknowledged her claim. In the hours that followed, those few souls still awake whispered in trembling voices of strange dreams, of standing in endless hallways lined with mirrors, of seeing themselves fragmented and twisted, of a figure waiting at the far end with eyes like molten silver. Some awoke, gasping, clutching at their chests as though something had been taken from them. Others did not awaken at all. Elara now, both presence and absence, walked through the city with silent steps. Each place she passed seemed to wilt under her touch. Neon signs sputtered and died, flowers in window boxes blackened and crumbled, puddles of rainwater reflected not the sky but shifting shadows that moved independently of any living thing. The pigeons, the rats, even the stray cats slunk away from her path, leaving the city's bones bare and hollow. She claimed the abandoned cathedral at the city's heart as her seat of dominion. Once a place of solemn worship, it now stood as a shell, its stained glass windows fractured, its altar stripped bare, its pews sagging beneath the weight of dust and silence. Here, Elara stood before the shattered altar, her form a silhouette against the backdrop of collapsed arches and crumbling stone. The shadows she had gathered began to take form around her, coalescing into figures, some half-formed, others grotesquely beautiful, all of them born from the fragments of souls she had devoured. They bowed before her in silence, awaiting her command. Elara raised a hand, and from her fingertips dripped a slow, oozing blackness that flowed like tar across the floor. It seeped into the cracks of the cathedral's stones, spreading outward in delicate tendrils that pulsed with faint luminescence. Wherever the blackness touched, reality shifted. The walls warped and bent inward, the air thickened with an intoxicating scent of decay and forgotten memories. Her voice, low and rich as velvet, caressed the ears of her assembled shadows. This is the beginning. This city shall become a vessel, its bones my bones, its breath my breath. The old order is gone. In its place, I will weave a new reality, one where sorrow is not hidden but embraced, where broken souls find their purpose. In me. The shadows shivered with anticipation, their forms twisting and merging until they resembled pillars of living darkness, each echoing faint whispers of laughter, weeping, and fragmented prayers. Elara stepped down from the altar, her bare feet making no sound as she descended. She moved through the cathedral, her touch leaving trails of shifting reality in her wake. Where once there were walls, now were corridors that twisted into impossible angles. Where there had been a nave, now stretched a vast hall of mirrors, each one reflecting not the viewer, but moments from their deepest regrets. Outside, the city's skyline began to shift. Buildings appeared to lean toward the cathedral, their facades rippling like fabric in a breeze. Streets twisted subtly, reorienting toward the heart of Elara's dominion. Those who tried to navigate them found themselves lost, drawn inevitably back to the cathedral, no matter how far they wandered. The city's leaders, its officials, its so-called protectors, found themselves paralyzed by indecision and fear. Those few who dared venture into the heart of the city to confront what they could not name found their minds unraveling at the threshold of Elara's influence. They saw their own shadows betray them, heard voices calling their secrets aloud. Some fled, others simply fell to their knees, weeping, unable to bear the weight of their own fractured souls. And Elara watched them all with a smile that was almost tender. Almost. As days turned to weeks, the city became known not as a place of commerce or culture, but as a whispered legend, the city of whispers, where shadows move of their own accord, where lost souls vanish into thin air, where reality itself bends beneath the will of something unseen but deeply felt. Travelers avoided it. The news reported on it in cryptic tones, speaking of disappearances, of a rising tide of madness. But those who knew, those who felt the pull, understood. Elara was no longer just a woman with an injured soul. She was the keeper of whispers, the mother of shadows, the sovereign of fractures, and the city was hers. In the deepening shroud of Elara's dominion, the city's people began to change. It was subtle at first. Glances that lingered too long, dreams shared by strangers, a sense of familiarity with faces they had never seen before. But beneath these quiet ripples of unease, something far more profound was taking root. Those closest to the cathedral, the heart of Elara's web, were the first to succumb. Shopkeepers, street cleaners, taxi drivers, and nameless pedestrians found their dreams invaded by a persistent murmur, a voice like silk brushing against their thoughts. "You are not alone," it would whisper. "Your pain is seen. Come to me. Become whole." Some resisted at first, clutching to fading memories of who they had been. But Elara's call was relentless, threading through their waking hours like an insidious hum, a lullaby that resonated with their deepest scars. Eventually, resistance gave way to an aching longing. They wanted to be seen. They wanted the wholeness Elara promised. And so they came. By night, they gathered at the cathedral's broken steps, eyes glazed with reverence. They came barefoot, in tattered clothes, their bodies marked by faint bruises where shadows had touched them. Elara greeted them not with speeches or gestures of grandeur, but with a smile and a whisper that slid into their minds like the cool touch of a lover. "You have carried your wounds too long," she said softly. "Let me make you beautiful in your truth." One by one, they knelt before her, and she reached out her hands, fingers like liquid obsidian, and touched their foreheads. With each touch, a piece of their old self unraveled, slipping away into the air like smoke. In its place, Elara wove threads of shadow, embedding whispers into their veins, memories of despair remade into devotion. Their eyes, once dull with defeat, now gleamed faintly silver, mirroring the molten light in hers. These first converts were reshaped into the whisper-bound, servants not through coercion, but through longing. They dressed in flowing garments of grey and black, their skin pale and luminous as if lit from within by shadows. They moved with a grace that unsettled onlookers, their smiles too still, their voices a perfect echo of Elara's own. They whispered in unison as they moved through the city. "We are whole in her embrace. We are seen. We are known." They did not enforce Elara's will through violence. No, they offered it like a gift. When they spoke to the unclaimed, it was with gentleness, a soft seduction. Why carry the weight alone? Why cling to a self that is already breaking? Come, let her make you new. And more came. The city's populace, already frayed by loss and fear, succumbed to the whisper-bound's allure. Entire neighborhoods fell into quiet, glassy-eyed reverence, their residents gathering in candle-lit vigils beneath murals of shifting shadows that appeared overnight. Schools closed as teachers led their students to the cathedral to be blessed. Hospitals emptied as the sick and the grieving followed the silver-eyed figures into the waiting dark. Even the city's remaining leaders, desperate for control, found themselves drawn to the cathedral, where Elara greeted them not as conqueror, but as liberator. She offered them freedom from responsibility, from fear, from the crushing weight of authority. And when they knelt, she whispered into their minds until they too became vessels of her will. Their power and pride twisted into perfect submission over time. The city itself changed, not just in architecture, but in spirit. The streets realigned subtly, leading all paths to the cathedral. The once bright billboards now shimmered with images of eyes watching, of hands reaching, of mouths whispering, words only the devout could hear. Public squares became gathering places where the whisper-bound recited litanies of devotion, their voices harmonizing in eerie, layered melodies. Children no longer played in the streets, they learned chants of praise, their voices rising like a choir of innocence wrapped in shadows. Lovers no longer met in secret. They shared whispered oaths of unity beneath the arches of the cathedral, their bonds sealed by Elara's presence. No violence marred these transitions. There was no rebellion, no cries of dissent, only quiet surrender, a yielding to the soothing touch of inevitability. Elara stood at the heart of it all, her form radiant and terrible, watching her city become a living testament to her power. The injured soul she had once carried was now a memory, replaced by something vast, intricate, and deeply satisfied. The city did not mourn its transformation, it rejoiced in it. And as her reach deepened, Elara began to look beyond the city's crumbling walls. There were other places, other hearts heavy with despair. She could hear them, faint but insistent, calling to her across the miles like distant chimes. She smiled. The world was full of broken souls waiting to be made whole. The city no longer kept the name it once wore, whispered only in the mouths of those whose memories still clung to the old order. Now to its denizens it was simply called the Hollow. It was a place where names meant nothing, where identities dissolved like sugar in rain, where all souls became facets of a larger, darker whole. Elara's cathedral pulsed with quiet, constant life, a heart beating shadows into every corner of the city. From its broken spires, silver-black tendrils of shimmering shadow coiled through the streets, sinking into buildings, merging with iron and concrete. The air shimmered faintly with whispers, fragments of memory, half-forgotten regrets, the gentle murmurs of the whisper-bound echoing through alleyways and beneath doorways. Those who had once resisted were now the faded, silent figures who moved with a kind of mechanical grace. Their eyes were dim, their mouths always slightly open as though trying to speak, but unable to form words. They had not been fully devoured, but absorbed, their wills dissolved into Elara's vast chorus. They worked where they were told, slept where they were placed, existing only as vessels of function. In contrast, the chosen, the devout who had knelt willingly, radiated a strange, ethereal beauty. Their skin gleamed faintly as though dusted with moonlight, their eyes silver mirrors that reflected not the world, but Elara's will. They wore garments of flowing gray and black, the cloth whispering softly as they moved. These chosen walked the streets with quiet purpose, speaking in unison. We are her voice. We are her hands. We are her will, made flesh. They carried out tasks with eerie precision. Some tended to the faded, guiding them through their mechanical existence. Others crafted intricate patterns of shadow across the walls of buildings, designs that seemed to shift and shimmer with hidden meaning. These murals became the new art of the city, living sigils of devotion that pulsed softly when touched by moonlight. At the heart of it all stood Elara, enthroned not upon a dais of gold or stone, but upon a living mass of shadows and whispers, her throne shifting with every breath, forming and dissolving faces that murmured adoration in countless voices. Her own form had transcended simple flesh. Her skin was as smooth and dark as polished onyx, etched with faint lines of silver light that pulsed in rhythm with the city's collective heartbeat. Her hair flowed like liquid night, each strand moving of its own accord, whispering secrets that only the devout could understand. She watched, not with eyes alone, but with her very essence. Her presence touched every corner of the hollow, from the highest tower to the lowest sewer. She knew when a child was born, when a mind was fractured, when a soul slipped free, and with each passing day, her influence deepened, her network of shadows knitting tighter around the city's bones. A new hierarchy emerged within the hollow. The whisper-bound acted as her messengers and enforcers, speaking her will with voices. Like velvet, their every word a thread binding listeners tighter to Elara's cause. The faded were workers, their identities dissolved but their functions necessary. Cleaners, builders, caretakers of the physical city. They were silent, obedient, shadows of their former selves. The chosen were the blessed, those who retained a measure of individuality but whose devotion had elevated them. They crafted the city's new art, composed its hymns, whispered its laws. They were priests and artists alike, creating beauty from surrender. In the cathedral, ceremonies of unveiling became a nightly ritual. Here, the chosen gathered with the whisper-bound to perform rites of remembrance and transformation. One by one, citizens were brought forward, those who still clung to their fragile identities. those whose dreams resisted Elara's call. Before the gathered congregation, these souls were unveiled, their names, memories and fears spoken aloud by the chosen, then erased as shadows coiled around them. As their pasts dissolved, their forms changed. Eyes turned silver, voices merged with the chorus, limbs moved with newfound grace. They arose from the unveiling not as themselves, but as her vessels. The city became a living monument to Elara's vision, a seamless weave of shadow and light, of silence and whispers, of surrender and transformation. The old city was gone, its bones repurposed, its spirit devoured and reborn, and still Elara's hunger was not sated. Atop her living throne, she whispered into the fabric of the world itself, her voice now stretching beyond the hollow. She invited those beyond the city's edge, calling to the lonely, the broken, the disillusioned. Her message was simple, seductive, and impossible to resist. Come, bring me your wounds, your fears, your secrets. I will make you whole. Even as the hollow transformed into a perfect echo of her fractured soul, Elara's gaze lifted to the horizon, where distant light still flickered in defiance. The city was only the beginning. Beyond the hollow, the world carried on, at first unaware. News reports spoke of the city's silence, of missing persons and whispered rumors, but they were dismissed as urban legends or local tragedies. Travelers who neared the city's limits found their memories fogging, their sense of direction crumbling as roads twisted subtly, diverting them away. Those who turned back were marked, haunted by persistent dreams of shadows and silver eyes, of a woman whose voice called them from the edges of sleep. The world's governments grew uneasy. Satellite images revealed shifting architecture, distortions of light and shadow that defied physics. Surveillance drones sent into the city failed to return, their feeds devolving into static, punctuated by faint murmurs and glimpses of pale figures moving with impossible grace. Still, the world hesitated. Fearful leaders debated action, but none dared invade what they could not understand. Meanwhile, within the hollow, Elara's rule deepened. The ceremonies of unveiling grew in scale and spectacle, with hundreds gathered beneath the fractured cathedral's arches, their voices raised in wordless hymns that wove through the air like living music. The chosen, now numbering in the thousands, developed intricate rites, processions of veiled figures carrying silver-lit lanterns through the city's arteries, trailing whispers that lulled listeners into submission. Art became ritual. Music, dance, and sculpture fused into acts of devotion, each performance a prayer, each creation a sacrifice of individuality. Walls were etched with living symbols that shimmered when touched by the chosen, pulsing softly as if breathing. Murals, shifted to depict moments of despair, transformed into unity, each one a testament to Elara's promise: wholeness through surrender. Within this blossoming structure, however, subtle fractures began to form, not of rebellion, but of ambition. Among the chosen, some began to vie for greater proximity to Elara's presence, believing that to stand closer to her throne was to absorb more of her essence. These power struggles were not expressed through open conflict, but through elaborate rituals, competitions of devotion where participants created increasingly elaborate and beautiful expressions of surrender. Some crafted living sculptures of shadow and bone, others composed symphonies played by choirs of the whisper-bound. Elara watched these contests with faint amusement. She encouraged them, for each act of devotion tightened her hold, weaving her influence deeper into the city's very fabric. She whispered promises into the minds of the most ambitious. "Impress me, and you shall become my voice in the world beyond." This promise became an unspoken command. Soon, rivalries formed among the chosen, intricate games of influence and art, where failure meant not death, but dissolution. Those who failed to impress were stripped of their individuality and absorbed into the faded. Their memories melted into silence. Among these shifting dynamics, a figure emerged. Silas, once an architect, now transformed into a chosen of rare vision. His creations were labyrinths of shadow and light, twisting corridors that ensnared the minds of those who entered. His ambition burned brighter than most, for he believed himself destined to be Elara's first voice, the one who would carry her influence beyond the hollow into the wider world. Silas's growing influence unsettled the other chosen, but none dared challenge him openly. Instead, they whispered in corners, plotted more elaborate ceremonies to catch Elara's favor. Silas, however, had already begun preparations for his greatest creation, a living monument that would merge with the cathedral itself, a tower of shifting geometry that would pierce the sky and serve as a beacon to draw the world's broken souls into Elara's embrace. Elara observed with quiet satisfaction, her silver eyes gleaming as she traced the threads of devotion and ambition. Silas's hunger pleased her. His drive mirrored her own from the days when she had first stumbled through despair. Yet even as her dominion solidified, subtle ripples hinted at something stirring beyond the hollow's boundaries. Individuals in distant cities, dreamers, the lost, the grieving, began to report strange dreams. They spoke of walking through endless halls of mirrors, of hearing a voice whisper their deepest fears and offering release. Some woke changed, their eyes faintly silvered, their skin marked by delicate lines of shadow. Elara's call was spreading, her influence seeping through cracks in reality itself. She was becoming not just a queen of a city, but a goddess of broken souls, a dark muse drawing the world into her embrace. Within the hollow, as Silas's great tower began to rise, the city held its breath. The chosen gathered in silent reverence, the faded labored without thought, and Elara watched from her throne of shifting whispers. The world beyond was beginning to listen, and soon they would come to her not in fear, but in longing. The tower rose not as a static structure, but as a living monument of shifting geometry, coiling and twisting into the sky like a serpent of shadow and silver. It was Silas's magnum opus, the spire of reflection. From its core, shadows pulsed, outward in slow, mesmerizing waves, distorting light and sound, making those nearby feel as though they stood on the edge of waking from a dream. At its base, intricate carvings of weeping faces and open hands reached upward, their forms illuminated by faint silver light that shifted like a pulse. The walls of the spire shimmered with delicate veins of black stone, interwoven with tendrils of Elara's own essence, each tendril murmuring faint, unintelligible whispers that could drive listeners to their knees in ecstasy or despair. Silas stood atop a balcony halfway up the tower. His silver eyes narrowed in concentration as he extended his hands to the sky. His robes billowed like living shadows, symbols of devotion etched into his flesh, twisting as though alive. His voice rose in a chant that spiraled into the air, carrying on a wind scented with ash and flowers. "Come," he intoned, his voice both a command and a plea. "Come to her. Come to the hollow. Bring your despair. Bring your emptiness. She will make you whole." And they came. At first it was only a few, lost souls drawn by dreams and whispers. They wandered into the city's shifting streets, dazed and hollow-eyed. The chosen greeted them not with hostility but with reverent welcome, guiding them to the cathedral for unveiling, where their memories and fears were gently peeled away, leaving behind only the echo of devotion. But soon the pull grew stronger. From distant towns and cities, from desolate highways and sleepless suburbs, more began to arrive. They came by foot, by car, by train, some walking as though in a trance, others driven by a nameless compulsion. Their eyes were glassy, their minds thick with dreams of silver light and shadowed corridors. Among the first of the outsiders was Mara, a woman whose life had unraveled into grief and addiction. She came stumbling into the hollow, her clothes torn, her eyes sunken, her voice lost to silence. The Chosen found her in the shadows of a crumbling overpass and led her to the cathedral. There, before Elara's living throne, Mara fell to her knees, weeping without words. Elara descended, her form shifting between solid flesh and liquid shadow. She touched Mara's face, her voice a caress that slid beneath the skin. "You have carried your sorrow long enough," she whispered. "Let me take it from you. Let me make you beautiful." Mara's body convulsed as her memories spilled out like a broken vessel. Her grief and despair poured into Elara's waiting hands, dissolving into whispers. When she rose, her eyes gleamed silver, her body graceful and luminous, her voice harmonizing with the Chosen's chorus. She was no longer Mara. She was Selene, a vessel of Elara's will, and her devotion was absolute. As more outsiders arrived, the city transformed further. The Chosen erected new halls of shadow and light, sanctuaries where the newly unveiled could undergo their transformation. These sanctuaries pulsed with a faint hum of whispers, their walls lined with shifting murals of those who had come before. Each mural moved as though alive, showing faces that wept, then smiled, then dissolved into shadow. Yet within this seamless growth, cracks began to deepen. Among the Chosen, rivalries sharpened into silent warfare. Silas's influence, once merely envied, was now feared. Some whispered that he sought to merge with the spire itself, to become more than Chosen, perhaps even to challenge Elara's supremacy. A faction calling itself the Veiled Chorus began to form, led by Isolde, a Chosen of rare subtlety and beauty. She preached that devotion should be pure, untainted by ambition, and that Silas's hunger threatened to fracture the perfect wholeness Elara had promised. Her followers met in secret, weaving songs of dissent into the city's nightly litanies, masking rebellion beneath layers of worship. Elara, watching from her throne, let this quiet conflict play out. She saw Silas's growing power, the spire's influence stretching beyond the city's borders. She heard Isolde's whispered warnings, her songs of quiet defiance. To Elara, this was not disorder, but refinement, the testing of loyalty, the forging of stronger bonds through struggle. Her voice threaded through the city's dreams, calming the turmoil with a simple truth. There is no rebellion, only evolution. Only the shedding of weak forms into something stronger. Let them struggle. Let them strive. In the end, they will kneel or they will dissolve. And so the hollow spiraled deeper into her embrace. The spire of reflection climbed ever higher, its peak now touching the low-hanging clouds, its pulse drawing more outsiders to its base. The Chosen's rivalries tightened into a web of devotion and deception, each player seeking favor, each gesture of worship also a veiled act of ambition. And at the heart of it all, Elara smiled, her injured soul long since devoured and remade. She was not merely a queen of shadows, she was becoming the city itself, an idea, a hunger, a whisper, threading through every mind. The spire of reflection was no longer just a monument. It had become an organism, pulsing with a heartbeat in sync with Elara's whispers. Its apex shimmered with silver light that bled into the clouds, painting them in shifting shades of black and gray. Travelers who approached the hollow from beyond felt its pull like a gravity that tugged not at the body but at the soul, a siren call laced with promises of wholeness, of surrender, of oblivion. At its heart stood Silas, his form now nearly indistinguishable from the shadows that surrounded him. His body had become lean and angular, his skin etched with sigils that pulsed faintly beneath the surface. He no longer walked so much as glided, his voice layered with whispers that slipped into the minds of those who heard him. The chosen and whisper-bound alike fell to their knees when he passed, murmuring prayers not only to Elara but increasingly to him. His ambition had outgrown mere devotion. He no longer desired to be her first voice. He sought to become something beyond, to fuse with Aspire and channel the city's collective devotion directly into himself. He believed, knew, that Elara's power could be harnessed, refined, made tangible through his will. On the eve of his ascension, Silas gathered his most loyal followers, those who believed in his vision of perfection beyond even Elara's grace. They stood at the base of the spire, their forms wreathed in shadows that bent to their will, their voices raised in a low, resonant chant that echoed like a storm building beneath the city. Meanwhile, deep within the labyrinthine corridors of the cathedral, Isolde and the veiled chorus whispered counter-harmonies into the air. Their songs, soft as silk but sharp as razors, twisted through the shadows, seeking to unravel Silas's influence. They did not challenge Elara directly. Instead, they wove dissent into the fabric of worship, creating subtle dissonance in the city's symphony of devotion. Isolde's belief was clear. Silas's ambition threatened the balance Elara had crafted. His merging with the spire would not elevate him alone. It could destabilize the entire weave of the city, tearing at the delicate tapestry of surrender and transformation. The veiled chorus whispered of containment, of binding him within the spire, of sacrificing his ambition to preserve the greater whole. Elara, seated upon her shifting throne of living shadows, watched both currents unfold. The surging tide of Silas's ambition and the quiet undertow of Isolde's resistance. Her smile, faint and knowing, deepened. She allowed it to play out. These were not rebellions. They were evolutions. Let them strive. Let them hunger. Let them teach each other the weight of their choices. The night of Silas's merging arrived. The spire blazed with silver-black light, casting its glow across the hollow, illuminating faces upturned in reverent awe and silent dread. Silas stood before the spire's heart, a vast, pulsating core of light and shadow, its surface rippling with Elara's whispers. His followers knelt behind him, their chants rising to a fevered crescendo. He extended his arms, his voice ringing clear and powerful. Behold me. I am the vessel of her will, the culmination of her vision. Through me we shall transcend sorrow and pain. Through me we shall become one with the truth of wholeness. The spire responded. Shadows surged forward, coiling around his limbs, threading through his veins. His body convulsed, his mouth opening in a silent scream as the spire's essence poured into him. For a moment, he felt everything. Elara's presence, the city's heartbeat, the pulse of countless surrendered souls. It was ecstasy, it was agony, it was too much. Silas's form swelled with power, his body stretching and fracturing as if trying to contain the infinite. His voice splintered into countless echoes, each one screaming a different name, a different memory. The spire's light flared violently, casting rippling shadows that trembled across the city. At that precise moment, Isolde and the veiled chorus enacted their countersong. Hidden within the cathedral's walls, they chanted a binding hymn, a subtle, intricate melody that wove itself around Silas's swelling form. Their song was not one of rebellion, but of containment, an offering of sacrifice, of binding ambition. Back into silence, Elara's smile widened. She rose from her throne, her voice threading through both the spire and the city's murmurs. Let it be done. Silas's scream turned inward. The shadows coiling around him tightened, compressing his form into a pillar of writhing darkness. His followers cried out in despair, their chants faltering, but it was too late. The spire pulsed once, violently, sending shockwaves through the hollow. Buildings trembled, shadows writhed, and then Silas was gone. In his place, the spire's core solidified into a column of obsidian veined with silver, humming softly with trapped whispers. His ambition had been absorbed, transmuted into a permanent testament to the dangers of hunger unchecked. His name was now etched into the spire's surface, a warning and a reminder. The veiled chorus, their work complete, knelt in silent reverence. Elara's voice, both amused and approving, filled their minds. You have served well, balance is preserved. Yet remember, there is no perfection without struggle. There is no surrender without sacrifice. The city quieted once more, its shifting pulse settling into a new rhythm. Silas's failure had not weakened Elara's hold, it had strengthened it, proving that even ambition was subject to her will. The spire, now a monument to both devotion and hubris, pulsed with a steady light, drawing ever more souls toward the hollow's embrace. And Elara, her form luminous and vast, watched it all unfold with the quiet satisfaction of a spider at the heart of a perfect web. With the fall of Silas and the containment of his ambition within the spire, the hollow entered a new phase, not of stagnation, but of refinement. Elara's vision no longer needed to expand violently. It pulsed outward in measured rhythm, subtle as a heartbeat, unstoppable as tide. The city's breath became ritual, every hour had meaning. Every action, no matter how mundane, was absorbed into the symphony of reverence. The faded swept the streets in unison, their movements choreographed into a meditative dance of surrender. The whisper-bound roamed the avenues in processions of quiet grace, their chants no longer requesting devotion. They reminded the people that they had already given it. The chosen, now more diverse than ever, became the city's spiritual architects. But it was Isolde, elevated in silent favor by Elara herself, who redefined the sacred framework of the hollow. She introduced the cycle of dissolution, a city-wide ceremonial calendar broken into phases, each marking a different stage of the soul's journey from fracture to wholeness. These phases were not seasons nor months. They were moods, shifts in collective emotion. You did not ask what day it was in the hollow, you asked what the city was feeling. The cycle of dissolution had 5 phases. The shuddering, a time of reflection and admission of weakness. Citizens wore veils of glass and ash, walking in silence. Shadow-marked altars were placed in public squares where people could kneel and whisper regrets into obsidian bowls. These regrets were collected, melted into black wax, and used to forge candles that would light the city's sacred halls. The bleeding, the most intimate of rituals. People painted their walls with symbolic blood-red pigments, representing memories being willingly excised. In private ceremonies, families or lovers would offer a memory, written, sung, or danced, and at the end of the ritual, they would forget it forever. It was not destruction, it was transcendence. The gathering. Streets filled with processions where the chosen and whisper-bound distributed sacred objects, fragments of broken mirrors, strings of teeth-like beads, silver-veined black cloth. These tokens were used in rituals to weave individual narratives into the collective, a surrender of personal story in favor of the whole. The drowning. The city fell silent. Fountains overflowed with black water. Citizens submerged themselves in ceremonial pools at dawn, lying still beneath the surface for as long as their breath could hold. Those who rose changed, unbound, were greeted with songs and allowed to choose new names, new faces, new purposes. The old self was gone. The hollowing, a time of celebration, paradoxically joyful. Citizens wore elaborate masks of shadowed gold and danced in the plazas. Here they celebrated what had been lost, not mourned it. In the final night of this phase, Elara herself would appear at the cathedral balcony and speak a single word to the city. Never the same word twice, never explained, but it was understood as a divine punctuation to the cycle. These rituals weren't merely spiritual. They shaped architecture, behavior, even the city's weather. During the bleeding, it rained crimson-hued mist. During the drowning, a thick, silver fog filled the streets. During the hollowing, the sky above the hollow split with impossible stars, not seen anywhere else in the world. Memory became currency. A market arose beneath the shattered ruins of the old government district. Here, known as the Exchange, citizens could trade memories, sorrowful, joyful, terrifying, for tokens that allowed them to participate in higher rituals. The most valuable were memories of betrayal. Traders, their eyes completely blackened, would evaluate the emotional weight of a memory before extracting it through contact, typically a kiss to the forehead. These tokens were not simply symbolic. When placed on the tongue, they dissolved into whispers, giving the bearer insight, foresight, or madness, depending on the memory's weight. Language evolved. A dialect called Murmuric developed among the whisper-bound and high-ranking chosen. A soft, spiraling tongue made of tones and gestures rather than rigid structure. Murmuric could not be written. It could only be taught through contact, shared mind to mind in twilight-lit rooms through silent communion. Entire rituals were spoken in Murmuric, and those who couldn't hear it would feel it, like pressure behind the eyes or warmth under the skin. Yet for all this symmetry, a paradox brewed. The deeper the citizens fell into ritual, the less they could recall their origins. People spoke not of who they once were, but of who they had been allowed to become. Names from the outside world faded from use. History became myth. Families dissolved into communions, living together not by blood or bond, but by shared ritual, resonance. You didn't ask someone where they were from, you asked them which phase they were born in. In rare, sacred moments, Elara would walk the city unseen, her presence felt as a chill behind the teeth or a sudden warmth in the lungs. She listened to the whispers echoing through the streets, the harmonies of her city humming a lullaby only she could truly understand. The hollow had ceased to be a city, it had become a body, each citizen a cell, each ritual a breath, each phase a heartbeat. And Elara, she was no longer a sovereign ruling from above, she was inside them, a shared truth, a beautiful infection. Elara's dominion was absolute. The city thrummed in synchrony with her will. The people were one voice, one breath, one shape. There were no prayers unanswered, because no one prayed. They simply were, as she was. But perfection is the most delicate illusion of all. It began not with rebellion, not with discontent. It began with memory, not from the citizens. No, their memories had long since been harvested, traded, or dissolved. But hers. It began when she walked alone through the chamber of echoed light, a hidden space deep beneath the cathedral, formed unintentionally in the wake of Silas's failed ascension. It had grown on its own, without her will shaping it, a cyst of time and shadow, thick with stillness. There the walls were smooth obsidian mirrors, and unlike the others in the city, these did not reflect her divinity. They reflected her before. Woman alone in a rain-slick apartment. A paintbrush dipped in red, a wrist bound in gauze, a face screaming behind glass. She stared, and she felt nothing, at first. Her perfection should have rendered her immune. But the mirror did not blink. It breathed, and in its breath, a sliver of herself stirred. The injury she had consumed had not vanished. It had been refined, repackaged, encoded, but never healed. She stepped forward, placing a hand against the obsidian surface. The image rippled, and suddenly her hand sank in. Her perfect fingers dissolved into cold light, and she felt something pull a voice, her voice but human, fragile, whispering, "You are not whole, you are hollow." Elara staggered back. Shadows recoiled, the chamber dimmed. For the first time in what may have been centuries, she felt afraid. In the days that followed, the city sensed her silence. The rituals continued, but the harmony shifted. The air held a wrongness too faint to name. The silver fog lingered too long. The murals wept black sap instead of water. Children in their communions began to hum unfamiliar tunes, out of rhythm with the current cycle. Some chosen called it divine transition. Others, in whispers, called it the fissure. Elara did not speak of it. She returned to the throne. She summoned no one. But inside her, the sliver grew. She began dreaming. Elara had not dreamed since her becoming, but now, each time she closed her eyes, she was elsewhere. Not in the spire, not in the cathedral, but in a room. Her room, small, gray, familiar. She dreamed of sitting at the window, painting faceless figures. She dreamed of the taste of cigarettes. She dreamed of someone knocking on her door again and again, but never opening it. And worst of all, she dreamed of feeling nothing. Each time she awoke, she shed part of her divinity. Subtle at first. Her silver eyes dimmed. Her whispers slowed. The shadows around her throne twitched without command. When she moved through the city, fewer noticed, fewer knelt, not from defiance but from confusion. She had always been present in them, inside them. But now she walked as if outside the weave. The veiled chorus noticed first. Isolde, ever attuned to the city's tone, described it as a wrong note beneath the cycle's melody. She walks as if her soul is dragging, she told her closest followers. Her wholeness is coming undone. And still Elara said nothing. She returned again and again to the chamber of echoed light, to that obsidian mirror. Each time she reached deeper. And each time she pulled back a memory, a feeling, a scar she thought devoured. And with each piece, her divinity cracked. The citizens began to mirror her descent. Whispers became murmurs of pain. The faded began to wander. The chosen began to question the ritual's rhythm. Some started remembering, not fully, not coherently, but enough. A glimpse, a name, a scent, a flicker of grief before the surrender. Memory became a contagion, and it spread. One evening during the phase of the bleeding, Elara returned to the cathedral balcony to speak the sacred word that would end the cycle. She opened her mouth, and no sound came. She looked out upon the thousands gathered below. They stared up, expectant, silent. She opened her mouth again and wept, not silently, not symbolically, real tears, bright and human. They struck the marble at her feet, black turning to water. Gasps rippled through the crowd, not horror, not reverence, something far worse, recognition. They knew her, not as a god, not as a whisper, as a woman once broken, and the moment they saw it, so did she. Elara collapsed. Shadows recoiled from her skin. Her perfect form flickered, spasmed, fractured. Silver bled into red. Her mouth opened in a soundless scream, one part agony, one part freedom. She had become more than mortal. But now she remembered why. She had created a city to hold her pain. But the pain had never left. It had only learned to sing. The hollow was not built from stone and shadow alone. It was made from certainty. Certainty that Elara was unbreakable. That she had devoured all pain and risen beyond it. Certainty that she could not change. But when she wept on the cathedral balcony, when her divine shell cracked and leaked something human, the first certainty died, and with it came a silence more profound than any ritual. Not the silence of reverence, the silence of fear and memory. Among the crowd that night stood a chosen named Vena, once a singer of murmuric, a composer of processional harmonies used in the drowning phase. Her voice had led thousands into their unveilings. She had touched Elara's hand once and claimed she had felt the divine pulse enter her lungs. She had believed, completely. But as she saw Elara crumpled before her people, not radiant but grasping, not composed but shaking, she felt something. She did not recognize shame. Not shame in Elara, shame in herself, for believing that the transformation had ever truly completed. She stepped forward that night, pushing past other chosen and fated who remained frozen in place. Her silver eyes dimmed as she approached the stairs to the balcony, where Elara lay curled in her own shadow, breathing in gasps like a mortal lost in the dark. "Elara," Vena whispered, her voice no longer layered in perfect tone, but ragged. "Mortal. What are we now?" And Elara looked at her, not as a goddess, not as a queen, not as the mother of wholeness, as a woman who remembered being broken. "I don't know," she said, her voice quiet, human. "I wanted to stop the pain. I thought if I became the end of suffering, I would never feel it again. But I only reversed the scream." Vena dropped to her knees, not in reverence but in collapse. Something inside her cracked too. The songs, the rituals, the sacred harmonies she had sung her whole life, they fell apart in her throat like dry ash. She reached toward Elara, not to worship, but to hold her. And Elara did not pull away. They sat there, goddess and devotee, shoulder to shoulder, silent as the moon. Across the hollow, others began to feel it. In the spire's shadow, the whisper-bound paused mid-procession. Their voices fell silent. Some touched their faces as if feeling them for the first time. Others blinked in confusion, as if waking from a dream they no longer agreed to. The fated stopped entirely. Their mechanical routines faltered. One by one, they sat down in the streets, gazing skyward, as if waiting for something no longer coming. The murals changed, no longer depictions of faceless surrender or perfect symmetry. Now they shifted into strange, asymmetrical scenes. People looking into mirrors and screaming, children with forgotten names reaching toward distant figures, mouths open wide, not in song but in need. And the city felt it. The buildings pulsed out of time. The air grew colder in the spaces between rituals. The fog no longer obeyed the phases. And in the underground exchange, where memories had once been traded like trinkets, the traders began speaking in fragments. "She remembers. We are more than we were. Wholeness was a myth we needed. What happens if she breaks?" Isolde, who had once orchestrated the veiled chorus, was the first to understand the truth. The rituals had never been sacred because they led to wholeness. They were sacred because they hid the fracture. They gave structure to chaos. A performance of healing. Now, with Elara unraveling, the illusion was undone, and yet Isolde did not fear it. She called her followers, not in secret this time, but in the open. In the central square of the hollow, before the spire that had swallowed Silas's ambition, she stood with a candle in each hand, one black, one white. Her voice rang out not in murmuric, but in her old tongue, long buried under the liturgy of shadows. "Let this be the last ritual," she cried. "Not for surrender, not for silence, but for the truth that we never healed, we only turned. Away from the wound, one by one citizens gathered, whisper-bound, faded, chosen, no longer separate, and they lit candles. Not in rhythm, not in choreographed beauty, but in chaos. Flickering flames rose across the city, imperfect, scattered, raw, no chance, no procession, only silence filled with choice. Elara, still on her balcony, looked out across the firelit city, not a perfect web anymore, not a seamless vessel of devotion, something better, something real. Her voice, cracked and human, rose one final time. Not a command, not a benediction, a question. Will you walk with me even now? And the city answered not in whispers, but in breath. In thousands of voices, uncertain but alive. Yes, the hollow would remain, but it would no longer be a monument to wholeness. It would become a place where broken things walked openly, where pain was not erased but shared, where even the divine could fall and still be followed, and Elara, no longer sovereign, no longer shadow, simply Elara, again walked into the streets, and the city walked with her. On the still edge between silence and breath, where something once divine has fallen and something far more human has risen in its place. A goddess wept, a city listened, and from the fracture, not ruin, but truth, emerged. Elara is no longer worshipped. She is remembered, not as a savior, not as a queen, but as the first to admit wholeness was never the goal. Only connection was. The hollow breathes now, not in whispers, but in shared imperfect songs. And beneath the cathedral, the chamber of mirrors remains, waiting for others brave enough to look and to feel. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something quiet inside you, thank you for being here, for listening all the way through. I pour a lot into these stories, and every view, every moment you spend here means the world. If you enjoyed it, I'd be deeply grateful if you could give it a like, maybe share it with someone who might need a story like this today. And if you'd like to hear more tales, dark, deep, or quietly powerful, please consider subscribing. There's much more to come. Until next time, stay curious, stay human, and keep listening to the stories between the silence.